Welcome to this Understanding Grief seminar here tonight. We're going to talk about memories and triggers. I am really excited about bringing this to you all this evening. I follow along, I read all of the posts that we have, and so many of us have talked about the pain and the difficulty that their losses created in their life and how much they missed a person. All really normal kinds of things and things to be expected. Memories are one of the ways that we get reconnected with our person. It's really important, and they're really one of the primary ways that we work with our grief and that we engage with our grief. And so I wanted to bring this to you tonight to talk about memories, to talk about the triggers that send so many of these memories flying around our face and can sometimes feel really disruptive and difficult and can make it really challenging for us. Grief is a head and heart experience. It's of course something that's got a rational component to it. We recognize that people die and that our loved one has been caught up in that and we know that and everything, but the heart, those emotional elements are really always much further behind in really coming to understand those things and incorporating that. And really what we want to do in our grief is to try to bring those two things together, our head and our heart. And both of them must be shared. We must deal with our grief and with our memories and things from both perspectives. So I want to talk about that here in this for a bit this evening. Now, one of the great ways that I love to encourage people to work with their grief is through art and different kinds of things like poetry or painting or music and lyrics. Those things are really important for us for getting into and being a part of our grief and being able to work through that a little bit. And so I'm going to use some lyrics tonight and some poetry that I found and little pieces of it and things, and hopefully that they will kind of open a doorway for you and give you a window into what might be going on and some way to travel forward. My name is Dr. Galen Gobin, and I'm the Grief Support Director and one of the administrators here at Journeys Through Grief, and I'm really grateful to have you tonight. I invite you, I'm going to ask some questions tonight, so use the chat box. Use the chat to put your thoughts in there and to tell us what you're thinking and what you're feeling. If you got a great question or something, just put it in there, and we're watching, we're monitoring, and we'll make sure and talk about that on this tonight. So, I think all of us know that somehow underneath that poetry and art and these kinds of things that are not so head-based for us can be really helpful for expressing and what's kind of going on with us. We oftentimes look for language. How many times do we go through and see how many emojis are on a post? And so many of us have posted a broken heart, prayer hands, angels, or other kinds, the crying faces or the caring faces that we have, the emojis there, because we're trying to find some way to really express what's going on inside us. And sometimes, regular language, just descriptive language, doesn't work for us so well. And what those things do is they get kind of underneath our skin and kind of underneath our consciousness, really, and get down to places where we may not be consciously aware of what we're thinking and feeling and all, because most of our thought is not conscious. Most of what's going on in us, we're not really aware of it. It would be too hard to kind of live that way, but it's there and it impacts us. And that's why when we're driving along and a song comes on, and maybe it's one connected with our person that we love and we're missing, maybe not, but a song comes on and suddenly we find ourselves just bathed in tears. And that happens to us because music and poetry and art can work such powerful things for us and move underneath our awareness and bring things up to the surface where it's really great, because then we can work with it. And sometimes it is just the tears that we do that are what we need to manage that and to process that. So one of the songs I want to work with tonight is a song by Van Morrison. Reminds Me of You. You may be familiar with it. We're going to post it here this evening, the YouTube link for it, so that you can go and listen to it. It's a beautiful song. The lyrics are really engaging, and Morrison is really talking about how much he's missing. And the first verse reads this. It says, "I miss you so much I can't stand it. Seems like my heart is breaking in two. My head says no, but my soul demands it. Everything I do reminds me of you." That, I suspect, sounds really familiar. That's a real familiar refrain everywhere we look, especially early on after a person has died, in the real intense times of our grief. Those reminders are everywhere, and we almost can't look in the mirror without having something trigger us and remind us of our person, and remind us then of our loneliness with that. Does that describe your experience? You know, what he says here, miss you so much I can't stand it, my heart's breaking in two. The pain that is there, the longing that we feel, or the yearning sometimes that we feel to be close to and connected with our loved one again, and to touch again those physical expressions that we shared with our person. That is really, we just long for that kind of stuff, and it can be so very painful. And I love how Morrison just starts here and brings this out right off the bat, because it is so real and so raw. His line, "My head says no, but my soul demands it." You know, a lot of the way that we are taught to manage our grief is to stay busy and to not think about it and to just keep moving forward. And, you know, you got to get past it and those kinds of things. And that's a cognitive part. And one of the ways that we manage our grief, we kind of use that sense of denial for a tool. It's not a stage, but it's something that's a tool that we use to kind of manage where we're at, especially when we're doing something, we're back to work or in school, or, you know, some other place where we really need to concentrate and focus, and we can't get carried off into our grief and everything, that we'll put that aside. And so our head says no, but boy, it sure seems impossible, because there's always the heart and always the soul that longs to be reconnected, and it just can't keep from being reconnected and finding ways to do that. The soul, as Morrison says, the soul just demands it, and demands that we engage with our grief. That's why, you know, we can't skip grief. We can't put it in a box. We can't leave it alone and not touch it, because it just demands so much of us, and it will require us to be involved with that. I miss you so much, Morrison says. I miss you so much in this house full of shadows, which is a line from his second verse of that. Again, I love that image that he's given to us there, because everywhere we are in a house, especially those of us that are grieving the death of a spouse, those shadows are everywhere, and sometimes they're not even so much shadows. Everywhere we look, there is a reminder. Those triggers just are multiplying before our very eyes. I would ask you, what kind of triggers do you have in your home? What kind of things trigger your memory and catch you sometimes off guard? And even sometimes maybe there's some movement or something in your house that feels like somebody's there. It feels like your loved one is back. That's That's not unusual. Many of these triggers that we have in this house full of shadows are really very simple things. But in their simplicity, they're so very powerful. Coffee in the morning. If your loved one drank coffee and you all sat down together, that would be really a massive trigger. Just the smell of that. One man told me about his daughter started wearing his wife's perfume after she died. And he said it just drove me crazy until I realized that it was her way of bringing her mom close. And he said one of the most beautiful and powerful things. He said, I had to give my daughter permission and myself permission for her to wear that so that she could do her own grieving. Because, you know, grief is so different for all of us. And in a household full of people, everybody's doing it a little bit different. And so those triggers are going to be different. And we've got to create space for everyone in the house to feel comfortable and safe to do what they need to do. And sometimes smells can be really, really difficult for us if they trigger a longing memory or some other kind of memory for us. Maybe it's a sight. Maybe it's the sight of you open the cabinet and there's the toothbrush or the comb. And you remember again that they won't be used by your loved one. Maybe you go and you open a book and there happened to be a birthday card or maybe some note scribbled by your loved one that was just placed inside the book in an offhand moment, and now you found it. Boy, that can trigger so many memories. A difficult kind of thing too. Maybe it's the activities around the house. Did you and your loved one do any gardening or yard work or take hikes or biking trips? You know, were there activities that you did together that when you think about engaging with them again, or you finally get the courage up again to get back on that bike or put on your walking shoes and walk that same route again, all of the memories fly around your face of the last time that you were there, of the things that you said and did. Maybe it's a sound. Maybe it's a sound you expect somewhere a little after 5 in the afternoon for that person to come home or for the alarm to go off, and you reach over and would rest your arm on their arm, and now the bed is empty. Those are triggers, and sometimes those things can last for a long time because of the expectations that we have and the habits that we have built up about our person and our lives together. Ruben Alves is an author and a poet, and he was talking about some of his memories, and he said, the emperor's jasmine grew in the backyard of my grandfather's huge colonial house, a place filled with mysteries where I played as a boy. He says, I walk by my plants. There are invisible presences in their midst, and the past becomes present. Alves has got a connection in his mind. Who knows what brought it up? Who knows what makes it? But that the plants in his house, as he tends for them, as he cares for them, reminds him of the plants in the garden of his grandfather's house, where he played as a boy. And each one of those plants then, as he does those things, really they're not just plants. They are, as he said, invisible presences, because they connect up with people that he knows and loves. And every time he's working with them, it brings those people, not in the past, and doesn't take him back to the past. It brings those people present to him in the moment that he's at. And that's one of the things that's both very hard sometimes, as well as very intriguing and so important for us, is that our memory does the same thing. To remember someone makes them present. It reaches out to grab a hold of them and bring them right to us. And sometimes that adds to the ache, especially again, early on in those raw and rough days, or maybe if there is some kind of experience or something, a part of your grief that is keeping you, making you feel stuck. I know a lot of us will talk about that on our posts and things. You know, those things, those memories, then those triggers don't bring something peaceful and helpful and hopeful. They bring a lot of pain. And part of what grief is doing for us as we move through that, and as we work with it, as we manage it, as we struggle with it and wrestle with it, is what Rachel Naomi Remen says is the ultimate goal of grief. And that is to remember with love, not remembering with pain. But sometimes that's what it does, because when it brings their presence to us in that memory, now their absence becomes really formidable. And it is something that just feels like it's going to overwhelm us. And that can be challenging. Morrison, in his song, says, "Seems like the spirit is pushing me onwards. I'm able to see where I tripped and went wrong." And he's talking about it in his loss, and he's talking about this person being gone, the realities of those difficult memories. And those places where, you know, try as best we can. Not all our relationships are not always perfect. And they can be really difficult sometimes. Do you have any difficult memories? Any things that are hard for you to manage, or things that bring up guilty feelings, maybe? Some difficulties there. You know, oftentimes we will try to avoid those difficult memories like that. We don't want to go where our soul has brought us, our spirit has brought us to those places where we tripped up and failed to be the loving person we wanted to be in the relationship. But to avoid those difficult memories sometimes can concretize our person. Sometimes it freezes them and our relationship with them back in the past. And maybe that's part of what is catching you tonight. Maybe that's a part of what is making your grief difficult and sometimes unbearable. It's some of those unhealed experiences and things. When we don't deal with those memories, when we don't wrestle with our guilt and our struggles and those places that we tripped up and went wrong, that person stays frozen in the past, and we stay connected to them through the pain. And pain is not the way we want to engage with our person. Sometimes it works, and as we begin doing that, the longer we do that, the easier it is to be that way. But it certainly is not the best way, because we have an ongoing relationship with them that can continue to grow as we continue to grow in our grief and in our own life, as we heal in our grief, as we move through it, and as we begin to integrate it into our life, and it becomes really a part of us instead of defining who we are. We have that relationship with that person that continues to go forward as well. And so sometimes our spirit, our memories, bring us those places where we tripped up, a little bit less than loving, a little bit maybe not paying quite the attention as we should have. And these struggles that we have, the guilt that we feel, those triggers can actually be something that help us, because they can be an invitation into looking for forgiveness. Maybe that forgiveness is something that we need from the other person, or that we need to offer ourselves. Or maybe that forgiveness is something that we need from the other. Again, no relationship is really ever perfect. It's always got some slippage within it. So when we have those kinds of memories and all, we want to engage them. We want to let them take us where we need to go. It's important to address it. Now, sometimes we're not able to do that by ourselves. You know, there's some great tips and some books and some things that are out there. And if you want some of those, message me on Journeys Through Grief, and I'd be glad to post some of those and to talk about some of those maybe in the future. But oftentimes it will be a grief therapist, someone who knows how to listen in the right way, listen to be able to bring our thoughts forward and to help us act on what our memories are asking of us to do. And we should never be afraid of a grief therapist or a therapy, because it really is our own answers that someone else helps us to discover and to find, and again, to integrate and to help make us move forward and to be whole. Everything I do reminds me of you. Everything I do reminds me of you, says Van Morrison. It's those memories that build the bridge that we are trying to cross to reconnect in a much more deep and full way with the relationship that death has broken with us. You know, it's interesting to note, and I want to let you know, that our brains are structured and designed to facilitate and to codify our memories and to propel us forward. Literally, the structure of our brain, the way it's put together, helps us to do these exact things within our grief that we need to do. And I find that fascinating. The emotional content of a memory is connected up with what a part of our brain called the amygdala, which filters every experience that we have and kind of connects with the emotion that's a part of it, how charged it is or not, and assigns it to some part of our brain. It runs through then the second area that's a part of that. It's called the hippocampus, which is a big part of our memory and is sort of the filing system for our memories. And everything that we experience goes through these two parts of our brain, get codified, connected together, and put into a filing system. And I find that just fascinating, that our brains are helping us to do the grief work. Sometimes, again, when those memories are painful, when they're difficult, it can be challenging. There's no denying that. But to enter into those difficult memories and to do that with a caring person or with some exercises that we can work through gives us some safety to be able to do that and to address those in a new way. And what's important about that is that the same brain mechanisms within our brain there that control what some have called the autobiographical memory, our own memories of our life, also control our visions into the future and the plans that we have and the things that we want to do. And I want you to hear that, because it's really cool and it's really important, because your memory, which we most of the time think is back there, and your future, which is out in front of us, collapse together here and now in the present. You can envision your future through the memory. And to make plans and to envision the future helps you to move through your grief. Now, for some of us and things, there are some natural built-in things in our lives that help us to do that. We may have young children, we may have grandchildren that draw us forward. We have to plan for them. We have to make sure that they're okay and to meet their needs and things. And those kinds of daily sorts of living things draw us forward in our grief and help us grieve in a healthy and processing kind of way. But we also can do these kinds of things where maybe if we had plans set in motion, things that we were planning to do, and then our person died, we can follow through on them. As an example, a therapist friend of mine talked about a woman that he worked with following 9/11. And she and her husband was killed in the Twin Towers. She and her husband had plans to redo their apartment and to paint it and get it all set up. And in her grief, part of what she was thinking about was like, well, what difference does it make now? You know, we were going to do this together. And the way things are now, I feel like, you know, he's really present with me. But as she began to work with my friend, she began to understand that she needed something going forward. And so she took those plans that they had and began to do those, and began to paint and began to rearrange the furniture and redo things. And so her memories there helped project her into the future and to move her in a healthy way into the future. And I think that because our brains are structured that way, it helps us to do that. Research also underscores, and this I got from an article that I read, research also underscores the importance of generating goals and aspirations for the future after a loss of a loved one. According to the researchers, quote, setting goals and working toward them may be an important component of natural recovery from the disruptive and painful experience of loss. So something that then moves us into the future and helps us to make plans to get there can be really, really helpful for us. I knew another man, as another example, who had gone into Europe and was on a trip in Spain and doing some hiking there. And while he was out on the trail, he met up with an older man. And like you do when you're on vacation, when you're out, hiking or in some situations like that, you just strike up a conversation. And what my friend discovered about the companion that he bumped into was that this was a trip that this man and his wife had planned for many years, to walk this particular hiking pilgrimage. And she had died. And what he decided to do was to bring a portion of her cremated remains along with him while he made that journey. Boy, the deep love that they must have shared as they planned those kinds of things, triggers something in me, because I can feel my own emotions filling up now. And that's the way these things work. And so here was this man on this journey who found a way to fulfill a promise and a pledge, a hope for experience that he and his wife shared. What a great way to move into the future and to continue that relationship that he had with his wife. What we need to do is to make, as Marta Felber talks about, repeated visits to our storehouse of memories. I love that term that she has, the storehouse of memories, because it's a part of our process. Those memories are there and they're waiting for us, and they help us to wrestle with what we have lost, to wrestle with what we missed, to wrestle with where we need to go forward. And they become really powerful for us and a great tool to move us forward. As a matter of fact, again, things that we're learning about how our brains work and everything is that repeated activity, this is a quote, by neurons leads to increased neurotransmitters and the synapses and the more efficient and the more synaptic connections. This is how memory consolidation occurs. To put it in another way, you may have heard this simple phrase, neurons that fire together wire together. And so we can take an old difficult memory, or we can take some place where we have been with our memories. Maybe we've had a tough experience with them and we shy away from them and we don't want to go there with them. We can take those and reroute our brains. It's a thing called neuroplasticity. And we can reroute our brains to be able to wire our brains in a new way by working with our thoughts, working with our memories in a new way. Again, Ruben Alves says, memories are the way the body has of talking about its void, and hopes are the way of expressing its longing in reunion. Isn't that what we want? Isn't that what we want? Is to be reunited with our loved one, and our memory can do that for us. And you know, that gives us hope. Because what that means with this whole thing about how our brains work and that we are able to rewire them is that even difficult, painful, old memories, old patterns that we have of interacting with our person, we don't have to be enslaved to those. We don't have to be enslaved to our memories or to the pain or any of that. We have the power over them to confront the pain, to receive it, and to acknowledge it, but not to allow it to be the ultimate power over us, which is the power of despair. We can be assertive in our losses so that we can move forward. And we do all that because, thankfully, grief is both a head and a heart experience. It's both cognitive and emotional. It's something that we need to do to bring them together again. And sometimes our memories make us feel like that was such a long time ago. We're missing our person. Everything I do reminds me of you, and we're missing them and have been missing them for so long. But memory becomes a tool that can collapse that space, across death even, collapse that space and bring us back together again. Emily Dickinson in a poem writes, long years apart can make no breach a second cannot fill. The memories of our loved ones. We bring them up and bang, they're here. They're here with us. And that is a very powerful thing to help us grieve and to move forward. The speed and the time that seems like so much is beyond and back gets collapsed, and it can be painful, but helpful indeed. And so we want to adjust our response to welcome the memories, do that cognitive shift, rewire our brains, work with both the rational and the emotional. And let the rational be a container for us in those spaces and times where it's really, really difficult. Let the rational be the container and help us to move forward. Developing new pathways, new neural pathways in our brain, integrating our loss, integrating those memories, and bringing us from the pain of remembering with pain to remembering with love. Now I see that someone's got a question here that parents had planned to move to Texas, but your mom ended up passing. Should your dad still consider the move? Well, that's a great question. One of the things that we encourage in a grief situation is to not make any more major changes for a while, because for your dad to move can bring some other grief onto that. Because even though it may have been a move, it was going to be a move that they were wanting to make and they had plans for and things, there still is a grief component to that, because you move away from things that you know and patterns that you have and people that you know here into a new situation. And so oftentimes we will say to not make any more major changes, such as a move like that, or changing of a job, or something else like that. For some, they go looking for and getting remarried again, but or to find some other kind of companion in that. And we encourage to stay away from that for a while, to be a part of your grief and let it to do its work. Now, there are things that complicate that. Maybe it's a new job that your parents were moving for, and there's not one here now, and they have to go. Those kinds of things happen. Maybe we have to move out of a home because we can't afford the house that we had or the apartment that we had when our spouse or our partner was still alive and was helping to support us in that. There are other kinds of things that come into play with that, and you have to weigh them all. But you really want to consider if it's just something that was going to happen, you can wait a little bit longer with that, hopefully, because then you can allow your grieving that you're doing here and the support system, which is another one of those big things that we have in a place where we have resided for a while. We have friends and family, and again, just natural parts, natural rhythms to our life that help us kind of re-engage and sort of find our footing again that we can move back into. If you move and go away from that, now you lack those, and it can make the grieving a little bit more difficult. That's a great question. Thank you. It's a hard decision to make. Hard decision to make. But you just do the best that you can and weigh all the factors around. So I really love that question. I have loved being here with you all this evening and providing this. Post your questions and we'll get back with them. If you are watching this later at some other time, because I know some people said that they wanted to be here but couldn't during the live webcast of this, put in your questions. Put them in the chat. We'll get back. We'll answer them as quickly and as best as we can. I want to leave you with these two thoughts. The first one comes from Karen Blixen, who's an author and wrote a story called Babette's Feast. And in there she says, what memory loves is eternal. What memory loves is eternal. And our memories make those people that we love eternal within our hearts and within our minds. And with us then in a full new way for as long as we go forward with them and continue to remember them. So thank you all very, very much for joining us tonight. Follow us on Facebook so we can be together in our journey through grief. And I send you peace as my last note. Peace as you grieve your loss. Take care.